Hi everyone, today we are customizing a doll. So, back in September 2020, the Doll Fair announced a design challenge for Avatar The Last Airbender. Now, although I'm not crazy about the series, maybe because I didn't watch it in my childhood, but I did enjoy it, and all its interesting characters. So I decided to join the challenge.
I came up with a character called Bai, and although I had trouble balancing her character between interesting and overdone, I really like how she turned out. And when she got an honorable mention in the Doll Fairies video in 2021, I felt it was a bit of an affirmation of her, so I wanted to make a doll of her myself. It took a while to decide what type of doll to use as a base. And after my Alvinia last year, I decided on a Pico Nemo, mainly because I love the body and prefer most of my collection in 1/12 scale. I bought her parts in the white skin tone, and her hair is navy blue hair. The body I originally wanted was sold out from the manufacturer, so I had to get one second hand from Mandarake or Mandarake, while I got the head joints and such from Hobby Search. The body is a S size old type body, and I was contemplating on using the more posable newer body for obvious reasons. It was too short and I just didn't like it.
Let's start with the clothes. Just a note, I'm classifying the things I did, but it's not chronological. Anyway, I start with the pants. I pin and sew the fronts to the backs at the side seams, then I sew the front crotch seam together before folding over and sewing the waistband and leg cuffs. I then add some decorative stitching down the fronts and backs before partially finishing up the back opening seam and partially sewing up the back crotch seam. I then sew up the inner leg seams and add a snap in the back for a closure, and the pants are done. Her arm cuffs are just rectangles of stretchy fabric glued into a tube and painted gold on the edges. Next, the shirt. I had some trouble as I originally wanted it to have it closing in the front like an actual garment, but the tiny size was an issue. So that was my first try. I then tried the same method, but removing all the excess seams like the darts in the front, the finished hems, etc. But that didn't work out either. Lastly, I used the same method as the first one, but I moved my closure from the front to the back, which turned out the best. So the process of the first one was starting off sewing the darts in the front panels before folding over and sewing the sleeve cuffs and the three edges of the collar. The third and final version of the collar was cut in two, sewn together, and then the three edges finished. I then sew the fronts to the backs at the shoulder seams before sewing in the sleeves at the shoulders. I then sew in the collar, sew up the side seams, hem the closure opening and the bottom of the shirt, add some Velcro and paint details, and the shirt is done. Next up, the Hanfu coat. It's partially lined, so I start by sewing together the three bottom lining pieces before folding over and sewing the hems of the sleeve lining pieces and the bottom lining pieces. Next, I add black ribbon to the sleeves and adding the white lining pieces peeking out beneath the ribbon. and I sew the shoulder seams of my red satin fabric to each other, fronts to backs, good side to good side, before sewing in the sleeves and closing up the side seams. I then add the black ribbon all along the bottom and opening of the hanfu, before adding the bottom lining like I did with the sleeves peeking out, and adding a thin white ribbon peeking out from the collar to make it look whole. I then used gold paint to paint in all the details. The belts are just a piece of painted ribbon with a snap closure and a piece of fray checked fabric cut to shape, painted, and decorations added. And the boots are some A-zone vinyl boots that were cut shorter, painted, and had a strip of fabric added. And the clothes are then done. On to body modifications. The body has some limited posability, so at least on the hands I'm going to modify some things. Mainly because I couldn't find more hands for this older body, and I like some wrist movement in my hands for my dolls. I'm using some hobby-based joints for the wrists, cutting the pegs shorter and drilling into the arm to make sure the joints can fit. Then I use a hairdryer and pliers to heat up the hands, put them on the joints to stretch the plastic to the exact size of the joint, and then submerging them in cold water to make them stay in that position. Then, to make sure they don't change over time because of heat fluctuations in the area, I put them on toothpicks that are the same size as my joints. And through the process of handling the body, I noticed that the A-zone dolls and bodies come with a matte top coat. So when I cleaned the body with some rubbing alcohol, it became shiny as the top coat came off. So I cleaned everything up and sprayed a layer or two of Tamiya TS80 sealant. Next, I'm going to work on the scars on her arms. After sealing, I use a darkish skin tone like watercolor pencil to sketch out and color a base for the scars on her arms. Then I outline the edges with white before sealing again. The second layer, I add some pink, darken the other color, and whiten the white parts, then seal again. The third layer, I outline the inside of the scars with a dark pink before using white and the dark pink to add texture to the scars. Using the white to highlight supposed raised edges and then the dark pink to make shadows in the crevices. I also do something similar to the outside of the scars so they seem less abrupt on her skin. And then the final seal. I wanted the scars to be slightly more realistic, so I used some references and I hope I succeeded. So I mentioned in the Pico Nemo body review video that the hair is too short, and Bai also has a white and black ombre effect on her hair. So I'm going to add some extra rooting. Also, I know my Pico Nemo head has navy blue hair and not black, but I don't mind as much as it gives a nice effect. A long time ago, I bought a super cheap party wig that had half white and half dark blue curly hair. I had disassembled it to use the dark blue hair for another project, which I haven't gotten to yet, and was planning to use the white for random projects, so I'll use some here. After straightening a weft, I separate and tie off chunks before removing the stitching and then straightening the other side of the weft. I originally thought that strategically placing the white would leave them sticking out of the bottom of the original hair color, but that didn't turn out too well as the white was pretty obvious. So I decided to partially dye my hair, but there's no suitable dye available locally. So I go at the center of the lock with some black alcohol markers. Smoothing the color transition to white and spraying it with rubbing alcohol is what I did. After letting the hair sit for a few days, so hopefully the ink seeps into the fibers, I thoroughly wash the hair with soap, then some rubbing alcohol, and again with soap. I repeated this a few times so that the marker left on the hair would not stain the vinyl head. I partially styled the hair on the doll's head so I know where to place my new hair, and start rooting with a homemade rooting tool, i.e. a needle cut at an angle shoved into a craft knife base. I add some hair to the cut needle and plug it into the head. Other people have better videos on rerouting, so I'll stop explaining. Then I use this fabric glue to fill the plugs in the head. I don't know how well it will work, but I'm trying to experiment with local materials. Anyway, after I let the glue properly dry for a few weeks, the glue was kind of hard and made the head more stiff because of it, so yeah. After that, I put the head on a skewer, tie the hair down and poured boiling water and then cold water over the hair, alternating between the two to tame the hair. After drying and the face up, I cut the hair to its desired length before resectioning the hair again, the bangs, the fringes, the hair loopies. I use my water glue to section off the pieces that go down to the sides of her head before trying to position the hair loopies and gluing them as well, while tying them up at the back of the head. And once the glue is dry, I use a piece of cotton swab to glue the hair around that to make a bun. And I honestly cringe at permanently gluing this part, as I like restyling, but the hair wasn't flexible enough without it. I also push a pin through the bun into the head to keep it in place. I then cut and trim the bangs and fringe, and I'm pretty much done with the hair. I just need the hairband. For this, I cut a strip from a drink can, sand the rough edges, fold the sides so it's neat and has no sharp bits. And my original plan was to etch the details into the metal, but that didn't work out. So I tried scratching the details on, which worked until I added paint, which made the details disappear. So I went extreme and glued thin wire onto it, which, although not particularly neat, worked well and looked pretty nice. And actually, I can use it as a ring for myself. Coincidental perfect fit. And finally, the face up. I wasn't able to get MSC, so I'm using Mr. Premium Top Coat Flat instead. As my usual sealants, Tamiya TS80, doesn't take pencils well when working on vinyl heads. Though I have heard that if you get the face up wet with Mr. Premium, it gets shiny, so I plan to use Tamiya at the end to protect Mr. Premium Top Coat. After a few layers of sealant, I start mapping out the face with a brown watercolor pencil. Her mouth is a bit wider than I'd usually make it, as I want to replicate her confident smile. Her eyes were a bit harder to map out, as her design has some slim narrow eyes and the head is more of a chibi style, but after a few tries I got it right. It helps doing her eyelids and eyebrows first though, but I still had to adjust the brows later. After I'm happy with the placement, I go in with some black, white and purple watercolor pencils, which was unfortunately not filmed. But anyway, after sealing, I continued to darken the colors. And I seal again, continuing to darken the colors and adding a bit of blue for shading in the eyes, and seal again. And the colors are not taking anymore, and I want this face up to have a more watercolor pencil look. So I'm dipping the very tip of my pencils into water, removing the excess water onto my hand and drawing onto the face. Usually people say this is a big no-no, as it makes the pencils not have a fine point for detail and colors can smudge and reactivate if you're not careful. But I want this pencil look, so I'm getting it one way or another. If something smudges, I carefully remove it with a damp but not wet paintbrush. I start with purple in the irises, then a bit of dark blue for the shadows and the insides of the eyes, followed by black and then white, and then the mouth and the eyelids. Then seal. I add the highlights to the eyes, lighten the irises, adjust some details before I seal again. Now, another pretty big no-no, well, kind of. For some reason, water maybe, my sealant became shiny. So I'm using some Q-tips, toothpicks with cotton swabs and acetone to wipe off the sealant everywhere that I didn't draw. Since I didn't add blushing, this is possible, but you'd have to be super careful as to not ruin anything. After that, I clean the area with water and seal. Make some adjustments and seal again. And all the parts and pieces are done, so let's put her together. So let's talk more about Bai. I'll put her info in the description box below. So, Bai is a firebender, and her father is from the Northern Water Tribe and her mother from the Fire Nation. They settled down in the Earth Kingdom in Senlin Village in an attempt to avoid a war. But in an attack from the Fire Nation when she was younger, her father died and her mother escaped with her, but ended up dying due to her wounds. Bai had then somehow wandered into the spirit world and met the forest spirit He Bai, who sent her back to a human village and eventually became her best friend. Partially because they have a similar name, and because of her friendship with He Bai, she often has contact with other spirits, and she tends to travel into the spirit world to, well, mess with Fire nations. And so, since then, Bai has pretty much a grudge against the Fire Nation, and she every now and then does some raids, messing with Fire Nation soldiers and whatnot. And she uses the spirit world as a means of transport, which makes the soldiers think she has the ability to teleport as she disappears completely. But since her parents are both waterbenders and firebenders, she was trained in both movements when she was young, when her parents didn't know what kind of bender she'd be, or if she'd be at all. And so, along with that and the loss of her parents in her early years, she pretty much adapted her own fighting style of whatever goes, whenever goes, and pretty much uses whatever she has with her, whether that be her hands and feet, teeth and nails, or any other weapons she can find. When she originally started to learn firebending, there was a bit of an accident which caused her to have some burn scars on her arms. So that's why she wears her arm cuffs or arm warmers to hide them from sight. For her personality, generally she's calm and indifferent, but her calm hides a storm and her temper can be fierce, and she holds grudges. But she's also very clingy with her friends and family. And like I said, she has a huge grudge against the Fire Nation, and in her character bio I jokingly added that she needs a Zuko field trip to fix that. And that was Bai, my original character for the Avatar The Last Airbender universe. So I hope you enjoyed, and I really did. I kind of have an itch to make the whole cast now as Pico Nemos. Too bad there's no dark-skinned Pico Nemos available at this time. So that will be a long off dream anyway. But yeah, I enjoyed making her, and I really hope you enjoyed watching me make her. And thanks for watching. Bye.